दोस्तों कैसे हैं आप लोग। नाउ टुडे वी विल स्टार्ट चैप्टर 2 ऑफ एनसीईआरटी इकोनॉमी क्लास 11 इंडियन इकोनॉमी डेवलपमेंट विच विल टेल us about Indian economy from 1950 to 1990. So before starting the video I'd like to request you to please subscribe my channel, like my videos and comment and share as much as possible so that it can be help to all as well as so many students. Now let's start with the introduction. So the introduction part is on 15 August 1947 India woke to a new dawn of freedom. Finally, we were masters of our own destiny after some 200 years of British rule. The job of our nation building was now in our hands. The leaders of independent India had to decide that, among other things, the type of economic system most suitable for our nation, a system which would promote the welfare of all rather than a few. There are different types of economic systems which see and among them. So the socialism appealed to Jawaharlal Nehru the most. However, he is found in favor of the kind of socialism established in the former Soviet Union, where all the means of production, that is, all the factories and farms in the factory, were owned by the government. There was no private property, and it's not possible in the democracy like India for the government to change the ownership pattern of land and other properties of citizens in the way that it was done in the former Soviet Union. Nehru and many other leaders are thinkers of the newly independent India. They are sought an alternative to the extreme versions of capitalism and socialism. Basically, the sympathizing with the socialist outlook, they found the answers in an economic system which, in their view, combined the best features of the socialism. Without its drawback, in this view, India would be a socialist society with a strong public sector but also with private property and democracy. So the government would plan it about as there is about it about goals and whatever it is. So we have our types of we will illustrate the types of economic system. This is very important. Listen carefully. That every society has to answer three questions to decide their economic system. What were the three questions? The first question is what goods and services should be produced in the country. Another question is how should the goods and services be produced, and should producer use more human labor or more capital machines for producing things. And third one is how should the goods and services be distributed among people. So one answer to these questions is to dependent on the market force of supply and demand. In a market economy, also called capitalism, only those consumer goods will be produced that are demand. So that is goods that can be sold profitably either by the in the domestic or in the foreign trades markets. If cars are in demand, so car will be produced. If bicycle are demand, then bicycle will be produced. And if labor is cheaper than capital, the more labor intensive methods of production will be used and vice versa. A capitalistic economy, the goods produced are distributed among the people not on the basis of you can say what people needs, but on the basis of purchasing power, the ability of buying goods, purchasing power, and the ability of buying goods and the services. That is, one has to have the money in the pocket to buy it. So low cost housing of the poor for the poor is much needed, but will not count as demand in the market sense, because the poor do not have the purchasing power to back the demand. As a result, this commodity will not be produced and supplied as per market forces. Such a society will not appeal to Jawaharlal Nehru, our first prime minister, for it meant that the great majority of people of the country would be left behind without the chance to improve their quality of life. A socialist society answers the three questions in a total different manner. In a socialist society, that government decides what goods are to be produced in accordance with the needs of society. It is assumed that the government knows what is good for the people of the country, and so the desires of individual consumers are not given much importance. Now, the answer is the government decides how goods are to be produced and how they should be distributed. In principle, distribution under socialism is supposed to be based under capitalism. For example, a socialist nation provides free healthcare to all citizens. Strictly, a socialist society has no private property since everything is owned by the state. In Cuba and China, for example, most of the economic activities, almost every economic activities are governed by the socialist principles. Now talk about most economies of the country are mixed economies that we have in India. That's the government and the market together answer the three questions: that what to produce, and how to distribute what is produced. In a mixed economy, the market will provide whatever goods and services it can produce well, and the government will provide essential goods and services which the market fails to do so. Now there is a word comes plan. The plan spells out how the sources of a nation should be put to use. It should have some general goals as well as specific objectives which are to achieve within a specific period of a time. That it is very important to return. Once again, I am reading that it should have some general goals, very general goals and specific objectives which to be achieved within a specific period of time. In India, plans are of 5 years duration and are called 5-year plan. We borrowed this type of trick from the former Soviet Union, the pioneer in the national planning. Our plan documents does not only specify the objective to be attained in the 5 year of plan, but also what is to be achieved over a period of 20 years. So there is also long-term plan is called perspective plan. Short-term plan known as 5 year plan, and long-term plan of around 20 years that is called perspective plan. The 5 year plan are supposed to be provide the basic for the basis for the perspective plan. It will be unrealistic to expect all the goals of a plan to be given equal importance in all the plans. In fact, the goals may be conflict. For example, the goals of introducing modern technology may be conflict with the goal of increasing employment. If the technology reduces the need for labor, technology reduces the need for labor, the planets have to balance the goals. A very difficult job indeed. We find different goals being emphasized in different plans in India. Our 5 year plans do not spell how much of each and every good and services is to be produced. This is neither possible nor necessary. The former Soviet Union tried to be this and failed. So it's enough if the plan is specific about the sectors where it plays a commanding role, or for instance, power generation and irrigation, while leaving the rest of the market. Now the economy of the private sector being encouraged to be the part of plan effort, the industrial policy resolution of 1948. Then the directive principle of Indian Constitution reflected the outlook in 1950. The Planning Commission was set up. In 1950, the Planning Commission was set up with the Prime Minister as a chairman, and the era of 5 year plan had begun from 1950. Now, the goals of the 5 year plans. A plan should have some clearly specified goals. The goals of the 5 year plan are very clear. That four important goals, there is four pillars you can say of the goals: growth, modernization, self-reliance, equity. Every 5 year plan have these four important pillars: that growth, modernization, self-reliance, and equity. This does not mean that all the plans have given equal importance to all these goals. Due to very limited resources, a choice has to be made in each plan about which of the goals is to be given primary importance. Nevertheless, the planners have to ensure that as far as possible, the policies of the plans do not contradict these four goals. Let us now learn about the goals of planning in some detail. So, first one is growth. Refers to increase the country's capacity to produce output of goods and services within the country. Growth it refers to increase the country's capacity to produce the output of goods and services within the country. It implies either a larger stock of productive capital or a larger size of supporting services like transport and banking, or an increase. Once again, I'm reading the for it is very important that growth it refers to increase in country's capacity to produce the output of goods and services within the country. It implies either a larger stock of productive capital or a larger size of supporting services like transport and banking, or an increase in the efficiency of productive capital and services. A good indicator of economic growth in the language, you can say in the language, there it is, of economy is steady increase in the gross domestic product, which is GDP. GDP is the market value of all the goods and services produced in the country during year by our nationals as well as foreign, whosoever it is. Complete the market value of all the goods services which is produced in the country during a year. So you can think of GDP as a cake, and growth of increase in size of a cake. If the cake is larger, more people can enjoy it. It is necessary to produce more goods and services. If the people of the India are enjoy, in the words of first 5 year plan, a more is 5 year varied life. So firstly, they will have to cover these boxes which are remain left. So I think firstly we have to cover this, very important. There written was the Mahal Nobish, they also known as the architect of Indian planning. Why? Because many distinguished thinkers contribute to the formulation of a 5 year plan. Among them, the name of the statisticians. The Prashant Chandra, his full name was complete Prashant Chandra Mahalnobish. It's shortly named as by Mahalnobish. So, planning in the real sense of the term began with the second 5 year plan. The second plan, a landmark contribution to development planning in general, laid down the basic ideas regarding goals of Indian planning. The plan has was based on the ideas of Mahalanobis. In that sense, he can be regarded as the architect of the Indian planning. Mahalanobis was born in 1893 in Calcutta. He was educated at the Presidency College of Calcutta and the Cambridge University of England. His contribution to the subject is statistics brought him international fame. In 1946, he was made a fellow member of Britain's Royal Society, one of the most prestigious organizations of scientists. Only the most outstanding scientists are made members of the society. Mahalanobis established the Indian Statistical Institute in Calcutta and started a journal which is known as Shankya, which still serves as a respected forum of statisticians to discuss their ideas. Both the ISI, means the Indian Statistical Institute, and the Shankya are highly regarded by the statisticians and the economists all over the world to this day. During the second plan period, the Mahalanobis invited many distinguished economists from India and abroad to advise him on India's economic development. So some of these economists became Nobel Prize winners later, which shows that he could identify the individuals with talent. That among the economists invited by Mahalanobis were those who were very critical of the socialist principle of the second plan. In other words, he was willing to listen in to what his critics had to say. That was a mark of a great scholar. Many economists today reject the approach to planning formulated by Mahalanobis, but he will always be remembered for playing a vital role in putting India on road of economic progress. And statisticians continue to profit from his contribution of statistical fact theory. Now, another box area it is as a country develops. Survey, we are talking about service sector. As a country develops, it undergoes structural change. In case of India, the structural change is peculiar. Usually, the share of agriculture declines and the share of industry develop becomes dominant. At higher levels of development, the service sector increased contribution more than GDP than the other two sectors in India. The share of agriculture in GDP was more than 50%, as we would expect for a poor country. But by 1990, the share of the service sector was 40.59%. So more than that of agriculture of industry, like that we find a developed nation. The phenomena of growing share of service sector was accelerated in the post 1991 period. This marked onset of globalization in the country, which we'll discuss on subsequent next chapters right now. So here we left the GDP of a country is derived from the different sectors of the economy, namely the agricultural sector, industrial sector, and the service sector. The contribution made by each of these sectors makes a structural composition of the economy. In some countries, what happens, the growth in agriculture contributes more to GDP growth. In some countries, the growth in agriculture contributes the more to GDP growth, while in some countries, the growth in the service sector contributes more to the GDP growth. Now we will study about modernization. What is modernization? To increase the production of goods and services, the producer have to adopt new technology. For example, a farmer can increase the output on the farm by using new seed varieties instead of using the old ones. Similarly, a factory can increase output by using a new type of machine. Adoption of new technology is called modernization. Adoption of new technology is called the modernization. However, the modernization does not refer only to the use of new technology but also changes in social outlook, such as recognition that women should have the same rights as men. In a traditional society, women are supposed to remain at home while men works. A modern society make use of talents of women in the workplace, in banks, factories, schools, etc. And such a society is most occasions is also prosperous. Now we will study about self-reliance. What is self-reliance? A nation can promote economic growth and modernization by using its own resources. A nation can promote economic growth and modernization by using its own resources or by using resources which is important from other nations. The first 7 5-year plans gave importance to self-reliance, which means avoiding imports of those goods which could be produced in India itself. So this policy was considered a necessity in order to reduce our dependence on foreign countries, especially for food. It is understandable that people who were recently freed from foreign domination should give importance to self-reliance. Further, it was feared that dependence on imported food supplies, foreign technology, and foreign capital may make India as a foreign technology may make India as self-dependent for other peoples. There it is. Okay. This policy considered the necessity in order to reduce the dependence of foreigners, especially for India industrial, and were recently freed from foreign domination. So should give foreign domination. So should give him self-reliance. So further, it was feared that Indian independence on India on important food supplies, foreign technology, and foreign capital may make India's sovereignty vulnerable to foreign interference and policies. Now, equity is a now growth, modernization, and self-reliance by themselves may not improve the kind of a life which people are living. A country can have a high growth, the most modern technology developed in the country itself, also have the most of its people living in the poverty. And it is important to ensure that benefits of economic prosperity reach the poor society well instead of being enjoyed only by the rich. So in addition to growth, modernization, self-reliance, equity is also important. Every Indian should able to meet his or her basic so basic needs, so such as food, What are basics such as food, a decent house, education, and healthcare, and inequality in the distribution of wealth and should be reduced. Inequality in the distribution of wealth should be reduced. Let us know how the first 7 5-year plans covering the period of 1950 to 1990. They attempted to attain these four goals and the extent to which they succeeded in doing so, which reference to agriculture, industry, and trade. In agriculture, we have learned in chapter 1 that during the colonial rule there was neither growth nor equity in the agriculture sector. The policymakers of independent India had to address these issues, which they had through the land reforms and promoting the use of high yield variety seeds, which ushered in the revolution of Indian agriculture. Now, land reforms. At the time of independence, the land tenure system was characterized by intermediaries. The tenure system was characterized by intermediaries variously called zamindars, jagirdars, etc., who were collected rent from the actual tillers of the soil without contributing towards improvements on the farm. The low productivity of agriculture sector was forced to India to import food from the USA, and equity of the in agriculture called the reform. Equity in agriculture is called the land reform, which primarily referred to change in the ownership of land holding. Just a year after independence, steps were taken to abolish intermediaries and to make the tillers of the owners of the land. Idea behind the move was the ownership of the land would incentives the tillers to invest in the making improvements, provide sufficient capital was made available to them. Now the topic is remain, that is ownership and incentives. The policy of land to the tiller is based on the idea that cultivators will take more interest, they will have more incentive, the increased output if they are the owners of the land. This is because the ownership of the land enables the tiller to make a profit from the increased output. So tenants do not have the incentive to make improvements on the land, since the land owner who would benefit more than a higher output. The importance of ownership is providing incentives is well illustrated by the carelessness and with which farmers in the former Soviet Union used to pack fruit for sale. It was not uncommon to see farmers packing rotten fruits along the fresh fruit in the same box. Now every farmer knows that the rotten fruits will spoil the fresh fruits if they are packed together. Now this will be a loss to farmers since the fruits cannot be sold. So why did the Soviet farmers do something which would be obviously result the loss for them? The answer lies in incentives facing the farmers. Since farmers in the former Soviet Union did not own any land, so they neither enjoyed the profits nor suffered the losses. So in the absence of ownership, there was no incentive or part of farmers to be sufficient, which also explains the poor performance of agriculture sector in the Soviet Union despite availability of vast areas of highly fertile land. Now, land ceiling. Land ceiling was another policy of after the land reform was the promote equity in the agriculture sector. This means fixing the maximum size of land which could be owned and by an individual. That purpose of ceiling land was to reduce the concentration of land ownership in only few hands. The abolition of intermediaries meant that some 200 lakh tenants came into direct contact with the government, and they were thus freed from the exploited by the zamindars, jagirdars. So the ownership conferred on the tenants gave them incentive to increase output, and this contributed to the growth in agriculture. However, the goal of the equity was full only served and the violation of intermediaries. In some areas, the former zamindars continued to own large areas of land by making use of some loopholes in the legislation. There were cases where the tenants were evicted and the landowners claimed to be self-cultivators, actual tillers, claiming ownership to the land and even when the tillers got ownership of land, the poorest of the agricultural laborers such as sharecroppers, land laborers did not benefit from the land reform. So the land ceiling legislation also faced hurdles. The big landlords challenged the legislation in the courts, delaying its implementation. They used the delay to register their lands in the name of the close relatives, thereby escaping from the legislation. The legislation also had a lot of loopholes which were exploited by the big landholders to retain their land. And land reform was successful in Kerala and West Bengal because these states have governments committed the policy of land to the tiller. Unfortunately, the other states did not have the same level of commitment, and the vast inequality in land holding continuity of the day. So, Green Revolution at independence, about 75% of the country's population was dependent on agriculture. Productivity in the agriculture sector was very low because of the use of old technology and the absence of the required infrastructure for the vast majority of farmers. India's agriculture vitally depends on the Culture widely depends on the monsoon, and if the monsoon fell short, the farmers were then in a trouble unless they had access to irrigation facilities, which very few had. The stagnation in the agriculture during the colonial rule was permanently broken by the Green Revolution. This refers to the large increase in the production of food grains resulting from the use of high yield variety seeds and with the modern irrigation facilities, especially for the wheat and rice. The use of these seeds required the use of fertilizers and pesticides in the correct quantities, as well as regular supply of water need. So the application of these inputs is correct proportion is vital, and the farmers who could benefit from HYV seeds required reliable irrigation facilities as well as the financial resources to purchase the fertilizer and pesticide. As a result, the first phase of the Green Revolution, approximately from mid 1960s up to mid 1970s, from 1965 to 1975, the use of HYV seeds was restricted due to some affluent states such as Punjab, Andhra Pradesh, and Tamil Nadu. Further, the use of HYV seeds primarily benefited the wheat growing regions only. In the second phase of Green Revolution from mid 1970s to mid 1980s, the HYVC technology spread to a large number of states and benefited more variety of crops. The spread of Green Revolution technology enabled India to achieve self-sufficiency in food, and with self-sufficient food grains, and we no longer had to be at the mercy of America or any other nation for meeting our national foods requirement. Growth in agriculture output is important. Growth in agriculture output is important, but it's not enough. So, if a large proportion of the increase growth in agriculture output is important, but it's not enough. If a large population of the increase, if this increase is consumed by the farmers themselves, and instead of being sold in the market, the higher output will not make such much difference to the economy as a whole. So if on the other hand a sustainable amount of agriculture producers is sold in the market by the farmers, surplus will sold in the market, and the higher output can make a difference to the country. The portion of agricultural produce which was sold in the market by the farmer is called marketed surplus. A good proportion of the rice and wheat produced during the Green Revolution period available as marketed surplus, which was sold by the farmers in the market. As a result, the price of food grains declined. Related to the other items of consumption are the low income groups who spend a large percentage of their income on food benefited from the decline from this decline in relative prices. The Green Revolution enabled the government to produce sufficient amount of food grains to build a stock which could be used in times of food shortage. While the nation had immensely benefited from the Green Revolution, the technology involved was not free. While the nation immensely benefited from the Green Revolution, the technology involved was not free from risk. One such risk was the possibility that it would increase the disparities between the small and big farmers. There were some issues were there, loopholes, that it will increase the disparity between a small and big farmer, because the small farmer can't afford this much. So since only the big farmer could afford and the required inputs, so there were by reaping most of the benefits of the Green Revolution. Moreover, the HYV crops were also more prone to the attack by pests, and small farmers who adopted this technology could lose everything in pest attack. So they also have to use a pesticide, as they don't have so much money, as they are not the small farm. Fortunately, these fears did not come to the because of the steps taken by the government did not come true, because some steps taken by government on that time. The government has provided loans at low interest rate to small farmers and subsidized fertilizers to the small farmers could also have access to the needed inputs. Since the small farmers could obtain the required inputs and outputs on the small farms equally as the output of a large farm in the course of a time. As a result, the Green Revolution benefited the small as well as rich farmers. The risk of the small farmer being ruined when pests attack their crops are considerably reduced by the services rendered by the research institutes established by the government. You should note that Green Revolution would have favored the rich farmers only if the state did not play any extensive role in ensuring that the small farmer also gains from the new technology. The debate over subsidies when the economic justification of subsidies in agriculture is at present a hotly debated question. It is generally agreed that it was necessary to use subsidies to provide an incentive for adaptation to the new HYV technology by farmers in general and small farmers in particular. Any new technology will be looked upon as being risky by farmers. Subsidies were therefore needed to encourage farmers to the test of new technology. Some economists believe that once the technology is found profitable, is widely adopted, and subsidies when the technology is found profitable is widely adopted and subsidies the subsidies should be phased out since their purpose has been served. So further, subsidies are meant to benefit the farmers, but a sustainable amount of fertilizer subsidy also benefits the fertilizer industry. amount of fertilizer subsidy also benefits the fertilizer industry. And among farmers, the subsidy largely benefits among farmers. The subsidy largely benefits the farmers in the more prosperous regions. Therefore, it is argued that there is no case for continuing with fertilizer subsidies. It does not benefit to the target people. To the target people, it is a huge burden on government finances. So, on the other hand, some believe that the government should continue with agriculture subsidies because the farming in India continues to be a risky business. Most farmers are very poor; they will not be able to afford the required inputs without subsidies. Eliminating subsidies will increase in the inequality between rich and poor farmers that violate the goal of equity. So these experts then argue that if subsidies are largely benefiting the fertilizer industry and big farmers, then the correct policy is not to abolish subsidies, but to take steps to ensure that only the poor farmers enjoy the benefits. Thus, by the late 1960s, India's agricultural productivity had increased sufficiently to enable the country towards self-sufficiency in food grains. This is an achievement to be proud of. That on the negative side, that some 65% of country's population continued to employed in agriculture. 65% of country's population continued to employed even as late in 1990s. So economists have found that as a nation becomes more prosperous, the proportion of GDP contributed by the agriculture as well as proportion of population working in the agriculture sector declines considerably. So in India between 1950 to 1990, the proportion of GDP contributed by the agriculture declines significantly, but not the population significantly, depending on the 65% to 1950, 64 to 1990, which was such a large proportion of population engaged in agriculture. Although the agriculture output could have growth, which was more less working people sector. The answer is that industrial sector and service sector did not absorb the people working in the agriculture sector. And economists call this as an important failure of our policies followed during the 1950 to 1990. So there is a box written over here that prices are as signals. You have also would have learned in the earlier class about how process of goods is determined in the market. It is important to understand that prices are signals about availability of goods. If a good becomes scarce, the price will rise, and those who use this good will have the incentives to make efficient decisions about the based on this prices. If the price of water goes up because of lower supply, people will have the incentive to use its greater care. For example, they may stop watering the garden to conserve water. We complain whenever the price of petrol increases, they blame it on the government, but the increase in the petrol prices reflects the greater scarcity in the price rise in a signal that less petrol is available. So this provide an incentive to use less petrol to look for alternate fuels. Some economists point out that subsidies do not allow prices to indicate the supply of subsidies. That subsidies do not allow prices to indicate the supply of a food. When electricity and water are provided on at a subsidized rate or free, they will be used as a wastefully without any concern. This is once again repeating that there are a lot of prices to indicate supply of food. When electricity and water are provided at subsidized rate or free, they will be used wastefully about any concern for their scarcity. Farmers will cultivate water intensive crops if water is supplied free. Although the water resources in that region may be scarce, and such crops will further deplete and already scarce resources. And if water is priced to be reflected scarcity, farmers will cultivate crops suitable to the region. Fertilizer and pesticide subsidies result in overuse of resources, which can be harmful to the environment. Subsidies provide an incentive for wasteful use of resources. Provide an incentive for wasteful use of resources. And think about subsidies in terms of incentives and ask you about for economic viewpoint provide free electricity to farmers. So now industry and trade. Economists have also found that the poor nation can progress only if they have a good industrial sector. Industry provides employment which is more stable than the employment in agriculture. It promotes modernization and overall prosperity. So it is for this reason that the 5-year plan places a lot of emphasis on industrial development. You might have studied in the previous chapter that at time of independence, the variety of industries was very narrow. History was very narrow, largely confined to cotton, textile, and jute. So there were two well-managed iron and steel firms, one in Jamshedpur and another is Kolkata. But obviously, we need to explain iron Jamshedpur Tata Tata Iron Steel Company, Jamshedpur and another in the Kolkata of the steel firm. So, but obviously, we needed to expand the industrial base with a variety of industries and the economy was to grow. public and private sectors in Indian industrial development. Indian industrial development, that the big question facing the policymakers, that what should be the role of the government about and the private sector in the industrial development. At the time of independence, Indian industrialists did not have the capital to undertake the investment in industrial ventures required for development of our economy. So nor was the market big enough to encourage the industrialists to undertake major projects, even if they have the capital to do so. It is principally for this reason that the state had to play an extensive role in promoting the industrial sector. In addition, the decision to develop the Indian economy on socialist lines that led the policy of the state controlling the commanding heights of the economy. As second five-year plan put it, this means that the state would have the complete control of those industries that were vital to the economy. The policies of the private sector would have to be complementary to those of public sector, with the public sector leading the way. Now, industrial policy resolution, which comes in 1956, IPR 1956, Industrial Policy Revolution. Policy Resolution 1956. In according to this goal of the state controlling the according to which the goal of the state controlling the commanding heights of economy, the Industrial Policy Resolution of 1956 was adopted. This resolution formed that the basis of a second five-year plan, the plan which tried to build the basis of a socialist pattern of society. This resolution classifies the industry into three categories. The first category comprises the industry which would be exclusively owned by the state, and the second category consisted of the industries in which the private sector could supplement the efforts to state sector, could supplement the efforts of the state sector, with the state taking the sole responsibility, for starting new units. The third category consisted of the remaining industry which were to be in the private sector, completely to be in the private sector. Although there was a category of industry which left to the private sector, the sector was kept under state control through a system of license. Now new known industry are allowed unless a license was obtained from the government. This policy was used for promoting industry in a backward region. It was easier to obtain a license if the industrial unit was established in an economically backward area. In addition, such units were given certain concessions, such as tax benefits, electricity as a lower tariff, and the purpose of this policy was to promote the regional equality. Even an existing industry had to obtain a license for expanding output or diversifying production, producing a new variety of goods, and this means were meant to ensure that the quantity of goods and produce was not more than what the economy required. License to expand production was given only if the government was convinced that the economy required a larger quantity of goods. Now, small scale industries. In 1955, what happened that the Village and Small Scale Industries Committee, also called the Carve Committee, once again repeating the 1955, the Village and Small Scale Industries Committee, Small Scale Village and Small Scale Committee, also called the Carve Committee, noted the possibility of using the small scale industry for the promoting the rural development. A small scale industry is defined with the reference of maximum investment allowed to the asset of a unit, allowed on the assets of a unit. So this limit has changed over a period of a time. 1950, on a small scale industry was one which invested a maximum of rupees 5 lakh. At present, the maximum investment allowed is rupees 1 crore. It is believed that small scale industries are more labor intensive, that is, they use more labor than the large scale industry, and before generate more employment, and therefore generate more employment. But these industries cannot compete with the big industry firm. It is obvious that development of a small scale industry required them to shielded from the large firms. For this purposes, the production of a number of products was reserved for the small scale industries. The criterion of reservation being the ability of these units to manufacture the goods. They were also given concessions such as lower excise duty and bank loans at lower interest rates. Now, trade policy which import substitution right now on that part time. So the trade policy which is near import substitution, trade policy of import substitution. The industrial policy that we adopted was closely related to the trade policy. In the first seven plans that the trade was characterized by the what is commonly called inward looking trade strategy. That technically this strategy is called import substitution. Technical inward looking strategy technically is this strategy known as import substitution. This policy aimed to be replacing or substituting imports with domestic production. That is also today they saying that technical that strategy very very important strategy, you can say. You can have very many questions with this strategy, that import substitution, that this policy aimed by replacing or substituting imports with domestic production. For example, instead of importing vehicles made in a foreign country, industry would be encouraged to produce them in India. Itself in this policy of government protected the domestic industries. The government protected domestic industry from foreign competition. Production from import took two forms: the tariff and quotas. Tariffs are a tax your tax on the imported goods. They are make imported goods more expensive and discourage their use. So quotas especially specify the quantity of goods which can be imported. The effects of tariffs and quotas is that they restrict imports and they therefore protect the domestic firms from foreign competition, protect the domestic firms from the foreign competition. The policy of protection is based on the notion of that industries of developing countries are not in a position to compete against the food produced by more developed economies. It is assumed that if the domestic industries are protected, they will learn to compete with the course of a time. Our planners also feared the possibility of foreign exchange being spent on import of luxury goods if no restrictions are placed on the imports. Nor was any serious thought given as to importance export until the 1918. Now, effect on policy of industrial development. The achievements in the India's industrial development India's industrial sector during the first 7 years are impressive indeed. The proportion of the GDP contributed by the industrial sector increased by the period 11.8% 1951 to 24.6% 1990 to 1991. Now, the rise in the industrial share of GDP is an important indicator of development. The rise in the industrial share of GDP is an important indicator of development. The 6% of annual growth rate was in the sector during the period is commendable. No longer was the Indian industry restricted largely into cotton, textile, and jute. In fact, the industrial sector became well diversified in 1990, which was largely due to the public sector. The promotion of small scale industries that gave opportunity to those people who did not have the capital to start large firms to get into business. The production from foreign competition enabled the development of indigenous industries in the areas of electronics and automobile sectors, which otherwise could not have been developed. And in spite of contribution made in the public sector to the growth of Indian economy, some economists are critical of performance of many public sector enterprises. It was proposed at the beginning of this chapter that initially public sector was required on a big way. It is now widely held that the state enterprises continue to produce certain goods and services, often monopolizing them. Although this was no longer required. An example of this provision of telecommunication services. This industry continued to be reserved for the public sector even after it was realized that private sector firms could also provide it. Due to the absence of competition, even till the late 1990s, one had to wait for a long time to get a telephone connection. Another instance could be the establishment of modern breed, a bread manufacturing firm, a bread manufacturing firm, as if the private sector could not manufacture bread in 2001. That could not in 2001 the firm was sold to the private sector. In 2001 what happened that same firm was sold to the private sector. Now the point is that after 4 decades of planned development of Indian economy, no distinction was made between what the public sector alone can do and what are the private sector can also do. For example, even now only the public sector supplies the national defense, and even the public sector when national defense, and even though the private sector can manage hotels well, yet the government also runs hotels. And so this has led some scholars to argue that the states should get out of areas which states should get out the areas which the private sector can manage, and the government may concentrate its resources on important services which the private sector cannot provide. Many public sector firms incurred huge losses to continue to function because it's difficult to close a government undertaking even if it is drain the nation's limited resources. This does not mean that the private firms are always profitable. Doesn't mean that private firms are always profitable. Indeed, quite a few of the public sector firms more were originally private firms, which were on the average of the closure or due to losses. So they were then nationalized to protect the jobs of the workers. However, a loss-making private firm will not waste resources. By being kept running despite the losses. The need to obtain a license to start an industry was misused by industrial houses. A big industries would get a license not for starting a new firm but to prevent competitors from starting new firms. The excessive regulation of what came into be called permit license raj. The country system comes the permit license raj, which was prevented the certain firms from becoming more efficient. More time was spent by industrialists in trying to obtain a license or lobby with the concerned ministries rather than thinking about how to improve their products. The protection from from foreign competition is also being criticized on the ground that it is continued even after it proved that to do not do more harm than do good. Due to restriction on imports, the Indian consumer had to purchase whatever the Indian producers produce. The producers were aware that they had a captive market, so they had no incentive to improve the quantity of their goods. Why should they think of improving quality when they could sell low quality items at a higher price? Competition from imports forces our producer to be more efficient. So a few economists also point out that the public sector is not meant for earning profit but to promote the welfare of the nation. The public sector firms on this view should be evaluated on the basis of extent or to which they contribute the welfare of the people, not on the profit they earn. So regarding protection, some economists hold that we should protect our producers from foreign competition as long as rich nations continue to do so. Owing to do all these conflicts, the economists called for a change in our policy, and this along with these other problems and led the government to introduce a new economic policy of 1991. Then this is the completion policy for 1991. The will I think chapter is complete right now. There's a conclusion remain. The progress of Indian economy during the first 7 period was impressive needed indeed. So our industries became far more diversified compared to the situation of independence. India became self-sufficient in food production, that's thanks to the green revolution, and land reforms resulted in the evolution of hated zamindari system. However, many economists became dissatisfaction for the performance of many public sector enterprises, and excessive government regulation prevented the growth of the entrepreneurship in the name of self-reliance. Our producers were protected against the foreign competition in the name of self-reliance. The producers were protected against foreign competition. This did not give them the incentive to improve the quality of goods that were produced that they produce. So our policies were inward oriented, so failed to develop a strong export sector. The need for reform economic policy. So we are here we are just failed to develop a strong export sector. So they need to perform an economic policy was widely felt in the context of changing global economic scenario. So the new economic policy was initiated in 1991 to make our economy more efficient. So this is the subject to the next chapter. Now recap the firstly, after independence, what happened? The India investigated an economic system which combines the best features of socialism and capitalism. Investigated an economic system which combines the best features of socialism and capitalism. This culminated in the mixed economy model. All the economic plannings has to be formulated through 5-year plans. The common goals of 5-year plans are growth, modernization, self-reliance, sufficiency, and equity. The major policy initiatives in agriculture sector, were land reforms and green revolution. Land seal, and great green revolution. These initiatives help India to become self-sufficient in food grains production. The production or proportion of people depending on agriculture did not decline as expected. The people decline depending on agriculture sector did not decline as expected. Policy initiatives on the industrial sector raised its contribution to GDP. One of the major drawbacks of the industrial sector was the inefficient functioning of the public sector, as it started incurring losses leading to the drains of a nation's limited resources. And chapter is completed. Thank you, and if you like my video, please like, share and subscribe my channel, and please share it as much as more possible. And these are the videos which I made, that this is only for purpose who don't have time, so just see my video and pair plugs, so that with the help of, so that you will complete your chapter easily. There is not any summary, there is not any nothing more much more explanation. Thank you so much.